The skinny boy kept sharing his meager breakfast with stray cats, hiding a painful secret. When the man from the black car discovered the truth about his morning routine, tears streamed down his face. Michael's stomach growled as he stared at the half slice of bread on his plate. The kitchen clock showed 6:15 a.m., and the morning sun hadn't fully risen yet. His grandmother's breathing machine hummed from her bedroom down the hall. He counted the bread pieces left in the bag for. That meant 2 more breakfasts if he split each slice in half like today. His throat felt tight as he picked up his portion. The sound of coughing came from his grandmother's room. Michael froze, bread halfway to his mouth. "Michael? That you in the kitchen, baby?" "Yes, Grandma. Just getting breakfast before school. Did you eat already?" Michael looked at his untouched bread. "Almost done." His grandmother coughed again, the sound rattling in her chest. "Make sure you eat it all. You're a growing boy." "Yes, Grandma." Michael's eyes burned. He remembered when she used to make him eggs and bacon every morning before the accident. Before his parents? He shook his head hard. No time for that now. He had to get ready for school. A soft scratching sound came from the back door. Michael walked over, peering through the clouded glass. A tiny gray kitten sat on their worn welcome mat, bones visible through its matted fur. The kitten looked up at him and meowed. The sound was barely audible through the door, but it hit Michael in the chest like a punch. He looked back at his half slice of bread. His stomach cramped with hunger. The kitten meowed again. Michael's hand shook as he opened the door. Cold morning air rushed in. The kitten startled, but didn't run away. "Hey, little guy," Michael whispered. He crouched down slowly. "You hungry?" The kitten took a tentative step forward, nose twitching. Michael broke his bread in half again. 1/4 for him, 1/4 for the kitten. He placed a smaller piece on the ground. The kitten darted forward and snatched the bread, scarfing it down in seconds. Then it looked up at Michael with huge eyes, waiting for more. "Sorry," Michael said. "That's all I can share today." He ate his own piece in 2 bites. It barely touched the hunger in his belly. The kitten rubbed against his bare feet, purring. Its fur felt rough and dirty. "Michael?" His grandmother called again. "Close that door, baby. You're letting the cold in." "Sorry, Grandma." Michael stepped back inside quickly. The kitten tried to follow him. "No, you can't come in," Michael whispered. "Grandma's allergic." "But—" He glanced at the bread bag on the counter. "Come back tomorrow, okay? I'll save you some breakfast again." The kitten sat down and started washing its face with a tiny paw. Michael's chest felt tight as he closed the door. He got ready for school mechanically, putting on his worn uniform and stuffing his feet in his shoes that were starting to pinch his toes. His backpack had a hole in one corner that was getting bigger every day. "Got everything you need?" his grandmother asked when he stopped to kiss her goodbye. Her face looked extra tired today, dark circles under her eyes. "Yes, Grandma." Michael hugged her carefully, trying not to disturb the oxygen tubes in her nose. "I'll be home right after school." "Such a good boy." She patted his cheek with a thin hand. "Your mama and daddy would be so proud of you." Michael's throat closed up. He nodded and hurried out before she could see his face. The kitten was gone from the back step, but Michael found himself scanning the yard for any sign of it as he walked to the bus stop. His stomach growled again. At school, Michael sat in the back of his first period class, trying to focus on the teacher's words instead of the hollow feeling in his gut. The girl next to him, Emma, was eating a granola bar. The smell made his mouth water. "One half," Emma whispered, breaking the bar in 2. Michael started to reach for it, then stopped. The memory of the kitten's hungry eyes flashed in his mind. "No thanks," he mumbled. "I already ate." The morning dragged by. During lunch period, Michael sat alone in the library, pretending to read. He couldn't stand watching the other kids eat their packed lunches or cafeteria food. His own lunch account had been empty for weeks. Walking home that afternoon, Michael's feet felt heavy. He'd failed his math quiz, probably because he couldn't concentrate past his growling stomach. How was he going to tell his grandmother? He turned onto his street and stopped short. A sleek black car was parked across from his house. A man in a suit stood next to it, writing something in a small notebook. Michael's heart started pounding. Was it someone from the bank? The landlord? They were already 3 months behind on rent. The man looked up and saw Michael watching. He smiled and lifted his hand in a wave. Michael bolted around the back of the house instead of going to the front door. He pressed himself against the peeling siding, breathing hard. A quiet meow made him jump. The gray kitten sat a few feet away, watching him with those huge eyes. "You came back," Michael whispered. Despite his fear, a small smile tugged at his mouth. The kitten meowed again, louder this time. "Chill." Michael glanced toward the front of the house. Okay. Wait here." He snuck inside through the back door. His grandmother was asleep in her chair, TV playing softly. Michael crept to the kitchen and took out the bread bag with shaking hands. 4 pieces left. 2 days of breakfast. But he broke off a small corner and hurried back outside. The kitten ran to him immediately. "Here," Michael whispered, placing the bread on the ground. "But this has to last, okay? I can't give you any more today." The kitten purred as it ate, pressing against Michael's ankles. Without thinking, he reached down to pet it. The fur was even more matted than it had looked. Michael could feel every rib under his fingers. "I'll help you," he whispered. "I promise. We just have to be careful. Okay? No one can know." The kitten finished eating and looked up at him, whiskers twitching. For a moment, Michael felt less alone than he had in months. Then his grandmother's voice called from inside. "Michael? Bet you home, baby? Coming, Grandma." He gave the kitten one last pat. "Remember, come back tomorrow. Same time." As he walked inside, Michael glanced toward the front of the house. The black car was gone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He just hoped it would be for the better this time. His grandmother was sitting up in her chair, oxygen tubes askew. "How was school today, baby?" Michael's failed math quiz felt like it was burning a hole in his backpack. But when he opened his mouth to tell her, he saw how tired she looked. How worried. "It was fine, Grandma," he said instead. Everything was fine. That night, Michael lay in bed listening to his grandmother's breathing machine and his own empty stomach growling. He thought about the kitten, probably huddled somewhere cold and hungry. "I'll do better tomorrow," he whispered into the darkness. "For both of us." But as he finally drifted off to sleep, the image of that black car kept floating through his mind, bringing with it a shadow of fear he couldn't quite shake. Michael woke before his alarm the next morning. The memory of those hungry eyes had followed him into his dreams. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of his grandmother's breathing machine down the hall. The clock read 5:45 a.m., earlier than usual, but maybe that was good. He could get everything ready before the kitten came. His bare feet made no sound on the worn carpet as he crept to the kitchen. 3 pieces of bread left in the bag. He pulled out one slice, then hesitated. After a moment's thought, he took out the second slice too. "Just this once," he whispered to himself, breaking both pieces into small chunks. "They'll need extra strength for winter." They? Where had that thought come from? Michael shook his head, trying to clear it. There was only one kitten, just one mouth to feed besides his own. The back door creaked slightly as he opened it. The morning air bit at his skin. It was getting colder every day. But the gray kitten was already there, waiting on the welcome mat. And behind it, Michael's heart sank. 2 more cats huddled in the shadows of the porch. One was a big orange tabby with a torn ear. The other was pure black, so skinny its spine made a sharp ridge along its back. "No," Michael whispered. No. I can't." The gray kitten meowed, rubbing against his legs. The other cats took a few steps forward, their eyes glinting in the pre-dawn darkness. Michael looked down at the bread pieces in his hand. His stomach felt like it was trying to eat itself. "Okay," he said finally, "but we have to be quiet. Really quiet." He placed the bread chunks in 3 small piles. The cats crept forward cautiously, each finding their own pile. Michael watched them eat, his own mouth watering. The screen door squeaked behind him. Michael spun around, heart pounding. "Michael!" His grandmother stood in the doorway, oxygen tube trailing behind her like a tail. "What are you doing out here so early?" Michael's mind raced. "I thought I heard something, but it was nothing." She peered past him into the yard, squinting in the dim light. "Are those cats?" The 3 animals had already melted back into the shadows, leaving only crumbs on the welcome mat. "No, Grandma. Just some shadows, I think." He hurried her back inside before she could look closer. You shouldn't be up yet. It's too cold. She let him lead her back to her room, but her eyes were sharp despite the early hour. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you, baby? Of course, Grandma. The lie felt like sand in his mouth. Everything's fine, but things weren't fine. Not really. As Michael got ready for school, his stomach cramped with hunger. He had no breakfast for himself today, and only one slice of bread left for tomorrow. The morning crawl of hunger-filled hours began again. In English class, Michael's vision blurred as he tried to read. The words swam on the page. Mr. Anderson? The teacher's voice made him jump. Would you like to read the next paragraph? Michael stared at his book. The letters wouldn't stay still. I don't. Snickers came from somewhere behind him. His face burned. I'll read it, Emma said from the next desk over. As she started reading, she slipped something onto Michael's desk, half a sandwich wrapped in plastic. He should have said no, should have given it back. But his hands were moving before his brain could stop them, shoving the sandwich into his pocket. In the bathroom during lunch period, Michael ate the sandwich in 3 huge bites. For 5 beautiful minutes, the gnawing in his stomach eased. Then the guilt hit. He had food at home, 1 slice of bread. He should have saved the sandwich, broken it into pieces for the cats. The cats. How many would be waiting tomorrow? What would he do when they showed up? And he had nothing to give them. The hallway outside his last class was buzzing with excitement. Michael tried to slip past the crowd of students, but Emma caught his arm. Aren't you going to sign up? She pointed to a bright yellow flyer on the wall. Winter dance tickets. $15 includes pizza and drinks. Michael's chest felt tight. Can't. Too busy. But it's going to be so fun. Everyone's going. He pulled away from her grasp. I said no. The hurt look on Emma's face followed him all the way home. $15. It might as well have been $1,500. The black car was there again, parked in the same spot as yesterday. This time, Michael forced himself to walk past it normally, even though his heart was hammering. The man beside the car wore the same dark suit. He smiled at Michael again, started to raise his hand in greeting. Michael practically ran up his front steps. Behind him, he heard a car door open. Excuse me, young man. He slammed the front door shut, breathing hard. Through the window, he watched the man stand there for a moment, then get back in his car and drive away. What did he want? Why did he keep coming back? A soft thump from the back porch interrupted his worried thoughts. Michael's stomach dropped. No, not already. It was too early. But when he looked through the back door's cloudy glass, 4 cats sat on the welcome mat. The gray kitten, the orange tabby, the black one, and now a new cat, white with brown patches. I can't, Michael whispered through the glass. I'm sorry. I don't have anything today. The gray kitten pressed its paws against the door, meowing. The sound went straight through Michael's heart. He glanced toward his grandmother's room. The TV was playing, some game show with loud buzzers and applause. She wouldn't hear if he was quick. Michael grabbed his backpack and dumped out his school books. At the bottom was an old sandwich bag with some crushed crackers he'd been saving for emergencies. 4 crackers, mostly whole. 1 for each cat. The gray kitten rubbed against his hand as he set out the crackers. The other cats watched from a cautious distance, creeping forward only when he stepped back. I'll figure something out, he promised them quietly. Just give me time. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. His stomach hurt too much, twisting with hunger and worry. Down the hall, his grandmother's breathing machine wheezed in its steady rhythm. He thought about the man in the black car, about Emma's hurt face, about 4 pairs of hungry eyes that would be waiting for him tomorrow. The sound of something scratching at his window made him sit up straight in bed. A dark shape moved against the glass. Michael's heart nearly stopped. Then the shape meowed. He went to the window. The gray kitten sat on the narrow ledge, looking in at him. 3 stories up. How had it even gotten there? You can't stay here, Michael whispered through the glass. If Grandma sees you... The kitten just stared at him with those huge eyes. Behind it, the moon hung low and orange in the sky, like a half-eaten cookie. Michael's empty stomach growled. On the ledge, the kitten echoed it with a plaintive meow. Okay, he said finally. Okay, but just for tonight. And you have to be absolutely quiet. He opened the window just enough for the small body to slip through. The kitten immediately curled up on his pillow, purring. Michael lay back down, listening to that soft rumble. His last thought before sleep took him was that he'd have to get up extra early to sneak the kitten out before his grandmother woke up. But even as he drifted off, another part of his brain was already working on the bigger problem. What was he going to feed them all tomorrow? And somewhere in the city, a black car drove slowly through the night, carrying a man who was also thinking about a hungry boy and the cats he couldn't stop trying to save. The gray kitten was gone when Michael woke up. For a moment, he wondered if he'd dreamed the whole thing, but there were cat hairs on his pillow and tiny paw prints in the dust on his windowsill. His stomach hurt worse than ever. No bread left. No crackers. Nothing. The kitchen clock read 6:30 a.m. He'd overslept. No, Michael muttered, rushing to the back door. They'd be waiting. They'd be hungry. 6 cats sat on the welcome mat. Michael's legs felt weak. He counted them again, hoping he was wrong. The gray kitten, the orange tabby, the black one, the white and brown cat. And now 2 new ones, both striped, both so thin he could count their ribs from here. I'm sorry, he whispered through the glass. I don't have anything today. I'm so sorry. The cats just stared back at him. The gray kitten started meowing, a sound that cut straight through him. Michael, his grandmother's voice made him jump. You're running late, baby. Did you eat? Yes, Grandma. The lie came automatically now. Just getting my shoes on. He grabbed his backpack and hurried to say goodbye to her. She was sitting up in bed, already wearing her oxygen tubes. The pharmacy called yesterday, she said as he kissed her cheek. My prescription's ready, but... She twisted her thin hands in the blanket. Could you wait until next week to pick it up? Just until the Social Security check comes? Michael's throat felt tight. Sure, Grandma. No problem. Such a good boy. She patted his hand. Oh, and the landlord left another message. He wants to talk about the lease renewal. Maybe you could tell him I'm not feeling well. I'll take care of it, Michael promised. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Outside, the cats followed him to the sidewalk, meowing. Michael walked faster, trying to ignore them, but their cries seemed to echo in his empty stomach. The black car was already in its usual spot. This time, Michael couldn't avoid it. The cats were making too much noise, drawing attention. The man in the suit got out slowly. Excuse me, he called. Could I talk to you for a moment? Michael broke into a run. Behind him, he heard the man sigh. At school, things got worse. His math teacher kept him after class to talk about his failing grades. The cafeteria lady gave him sad looks when he walked past without getting in line for lunch. And Emma wouldn't even look at him anymore. His stomach hurt so bad he could barely think. During last period, black spots danced at the edges of his vision. Mr. Anderson? The teacher's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you feeling all right? Michael opened his mouth to say he was fine, but the room tilted sideways instead. The next thing he knew, he was in the nurse's office, lying on a paper-covered cot. When did you last eat? The nurse asked, peering into his eyes with a small light. This morning, Michael lied. I had breakfast. She didn't look like she believed him. I'm going to call your grandmother. No. Michael sat up too fast, making his head spin. Please don't. She's not feeling well today. I don't want to worry her. The nurse's face softened. At least let me give you something to eat. She brought him crackers and juice from her office mini fridge. Michael's hands shook as he ate them, trying to go slow, even though his stomach screamed for more. You know, the nurse said carefully, there are programs that can help. Free lunch applications, food assistance. We're fine. Michael cut her off. Really, I just forgot to eat today. It won't happen again. But it would happen again. He knew it would. Walking home, Michael felt the crackers and juice sitting like a rock in his stomach. He should have saved them. Should have taken them home for the cats. The cats. How many would be waiting now? He turned onto his street and stopped dead. The welcome mat was covered in cats. Not 6 anymore, at least 10. And the black car was parked in its usual spot. The man in the suit stood talking to Mrs. Peterson from next door. She was gesturing angrily toward Michael's house. Can't have all these strays around, Michael heard her say as he crept closer. They're making a mess, fighting at night. Someone's feeding them, and I know it's that boy. Michael's chest felt too tight to breathe. He slipped around the back of the house, But there was no escape there either. Cats scattered as he approached, then regrouped, surrounding him with hungry meows. "Please," he whispered. "Please be quiet. Just for today." But their cries only got louder. Lights came on in neighboring houses. A dog started barking. The back door opened. Michael's grandmother stood there, without her oxygen tubes. "Michael." Her eyes went wide at the sight of all the cats. "What's going on? Why are there so many?" She started coughing, harsh and deep. Michael rushed to help her inside, but she couldn't stop. Her face was turning gray. "Grandma?" Fear made his voice crack. "Grandma?" She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. Michael ran for her oxygen machine, but his shaking hands fumbled with the tubes. A knock at the front door made him freeze. "Mrs. Anderson?" A man's voice, the one from the black car. "I'm Dr. Thompson from the veterinary clinic. I need to speak with you about the cats." Another knock, louder this time. "Mrs. Anderson? Is everything all right in there?" Michael's grandmother was still coughing. The cats were still crying outside. And Michael couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The front door opened. Dr. Thompson stood there, concern on his face. Behind him, Mrs. Peterson peered into the house with narrow eyes. "I heard coughing," Dr. Thompson said. "Is everything?" He saw Michael's grandmother then, her face gray, her hands clutching her chest. In 2 quick steps, he was beside her, helping her sit down, checking her pulse. "Call 911, he told Michael sharply. "Now." Michael's fingers felt numb as he dialed. The operator's voice seemed to come from very far away. He watched Dr. Thompson help his grandmother with her oxygen, watched Mrs. Peterson hovering in the doorway. And outside, the cats kept crying, their hungry voices rising into the gathering dark like an accusation. Everything was falling apart, and it was all his fault. Because he couldn't say no to a hungry kitten. Because he thought he could help when he barely had enough for himself. The ambulance lights painted the street red and blue. Neighbors gathered on their porches to watch. And everywhere Michael looked, there were cats in the bushes, under cars, on the fence posts, watching with their gleaming eyes. Dr. Thompson put a hand on Michael's shoulder as the paramedics loaded his grandmother into the ambulance. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About the cats. About your grandmother. About you." Michael looked up at him, expecting to see anger or judgment. But the man's eyes were kind. And for the first time since this all began, Michael felt something besides hunger and fear. He felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to do this alone anymore. The hospital waiting room smelled like bleach and old coffee. Michael sat hunched in a plastic chair, his empty stomach long past hurting. Dr. Thompson paced near the vending machines, occasionally checking his phone. "Should have been an update by now," he muttered. Michael pulled his knees tighter to his chest. The image of his grandmother's gray face wouldn't leave his mind. The sound of her coughing. The cats crying outside. "Here." Dr. Thompson's voice broke through his thoughts. He held out a sandwich from the vending machine. "You need to eat something." Michael started to shake his head, but his hand reached for the sandwich on its own. He unwrapped it slowly, the smell of peanut butter making his mouth water. "The cats," he said suddenly. "Who's going to feed? I've got someone checking on them." Dr. Thompson sat down beside him. "That's not your responsibility right now." Michael took a small bite of the sandwich, then another. Then he was shoving it into his mouth, barely chewing, unable to stop himself. "Slow down," Dr. Thompson said gently. "There's more where that came from." Tears burned Michael's eyes. He tried to swallow them back with the sandwich, but they came anyway, hot and fast. "I messed everything up," he choked out. "The cats, Grandma's medicine, the rent, Mrs. Anderson." They both looked up. A doctor stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Your grandmother is stable," she said, "but her oxygen levels are dangerously low. She'll need to stay here for at least a few days." Michael's chest felt tight. "But who's going to—" "I'll stay with him," Dr. Thompson said. "I'm a family friend." The doctor nodded. "You can see her briefly, but she needs rest." His grandmother looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines. Her eyes were closed, an oxygen mask covering most of her face. "Grandma?" Michael's voice cracked. She opened her eyes slowly, tried to smile behind the mask. "My baby," she whispered. I'm sorry, should have told you about the bills. Don't talk, Michael said quickly. Just rest. Everything's going to be okay. But on the way back to their house, nothing felt okay. Dr. Thompson drove in silence while Michael stared out the window of the black car he'd been so afraid of. The porch light was on when they pulled up. Cats scattered into the shadows. Let me guess, Dr. Thompson said as they walked to the door. You've been sharing your food with them. Michael's face burned. They were hungry, and you weren't? Inside, the house felt empty without his grandmother's breathing machine. Dr. Thompson went straight to the kitchen, opening cabinets. When was the last time you had a full meal? Michael couldn't remember. We're fine. We just budget carefully. Dr. Thompson held up an empty bread bag, raised his eyebrows. The food stamps come next week, Michael mumbled. And Grandma's check, which goes straight to rent and medical bills, I'm guessing. Michael stared at his feet. After a moment, Dr. Thompson sighed. Get your coat, he said. We're going shopping. The grocery store was almost empty this late. Michael trailed behind the cart as Dr. Thompson filled it with bread, milk, eggs, canned soup, tuna. The cats can have some of this tuna, he said, adding another can to the pile. But you eat first from now on. Understand? Michael nodded, throat tight. Back home, Dr. Thompson made him eat a bowl of soup before anything else. Then they took some tuna out to the porch. Cats emerged from every shadow. The gray kitten came right up to Michael, rubbing against his legs. Quite a family you've gathered here, Dr. Thompson said, watching them eat. I didn't mean to. Michael stroked the gray kitten's back. It just happened. Things usually do. Dr. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother's medical bills. How far behind are you? Michael's stomach clenched. 3 months. The landlord, he says we have to catch up or move out. And school? I'm guessing those fainting spells aren't new. The nurse wants me to apply for free lunch. Michael's face felt hot. But Grandma says we don't take handouts. It's not a handout. It's help. Dr. Thompson watched the cats eating. Like what you're doing for them. Tears burned Michael's eyes again. But I couldn't really help them. I just made everything worse. You did what you could with what you had. Dr. Thompson's voice was gentle. But now it's time to let someone help you too. The gray kitten finished eating and jumped into Michael's lap, purring. Other cats crowded closer, their eyes gleaming in the porch light. I don't know how, Michael whispered. Start by eating breakfast tomorrow. Dr. Thompson stood up. A real breakfast, not just half a slice of bread. I'll pick you up for school, then we'll go see your grandmother. You don't have to. I know. Dr. Thompson smiled slightly, like you didn't have to feed that first kitten. But here we are. That night, lying in his bed with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, Michael heard cats crying outside his window. But it didn't hurt like before. They weren't crying from hunger anymore. The gray kitten appeared on his windowsill again. Michael let it in without hesitation this time. Things are going to change, he told it as it curled up on his pillow. I don't know how yet, but... His phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Thompson. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Michael closed his eyes, the kitten's purring rumbling against his chest. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. But in the back of his mind, questions still nagged. How long would this help last? What would happen when his grandmother came home? Could they really catch up on all the bills? And most importantly, what would happen to all the cats who now depended on him? The gray kitten stretched out a paw, touching his face softly, like it was saying, one problem at a time. Michael fell asleep like that, warm and full and worried and hopeful, all at once. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. At least tonight, everyone had eaten. Tonight, that was enough. Morning sunlight streamed through Michael's window, waking him earlier than usual. The gray kitten was gone again, but the smell of coffee? He sat up straight. Someone was in the kitchen. Michael crept down the hallway, heart pounding. Then he remembered Dr. Thompson had said he'd come by for breakfast. The veterinarian stood at the stove, scrambling eggs. 2 plates sat ready on the counter, toast already buttered. Perfect timing, Dr. Thompson said without turning around. Hope you're hungry. Michael's stomach growled in response. The eggs smelled better than anything he could remember. Set the table? Dr. Thompson nodded toward the plates. Cats are already fed, by the way. I got here early. Michael froze in the act of reaching for the plates. You fed them. Professional interest. Dr. Thompson slid eggs onto both plates. Wanted to get a better look at their condition. That gray one of yours is quite the character. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Michael tried not to wolf down the food, but it was hard. Real eggs. Real toast. His head felt clearer already. So, Dr. Thompson said finally, we need to talk about a few things. Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, filed a formal complaint about the cats. The city could fine you, or worse, they can't take them. Michael's voice cracked. They'll put them in the shelter. They'll... Easy? Dr. Thompson held up a hand. That's not going to happen. But we need a better solution than feeding strays on your back porch. Michael pushed his eggs around his plate. What kind of solution? I have a proposal. But first, we need to visit your grandmother. The hospital hallway seemed longer this morning. Michael's shoes squeaked on the polished floor. His grandmother was awake, sitting up slightly. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a thin tube under her nose. Her face had more color. Baby, she smiled, reaching for him. Then she saw Dr. Thompson. Her smile faded. Oh, Dr. Thompson, ma'am. I've been helping Michael with the cats. Cats? She looked at Michael. What cats? Michael's throat felt tight. I've been feeding some strays. Just a few at first, but 11 at last count, Dr. Thompson said. All in need of medical care, proper food, and homes. His grandmother's hand trembled in Michael's. We can't afford. I'm so sorry, baby. I know things have been tight. That's what I wanted to discuss. Dr. Thompson pulled up a chair. My clinic runs a community outreach program. We provide care for strays, help find them homes. We could use someone with Michael's dedication. Michael's head snapped up. What? Part-time work after school? Learning to care for the animals properly. Man. Dr. Thompson looked at Michael's grandmother. We have an opening for office help. Light work, flexible hours. With benefits. The room went very quiet. Michael could hear his own heart beating. We don't take charity, his grandmother said softly. It's not charity. It's a job offer. Too. Actually, Dr. Thompson's voice was firm. Michael has a gift with animals. And you have years of office experience, according to your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. Michael's grandmother snorted. That nosy was very concerned about you. Dr. Thompson cut in smoothly. Told me all about your work before the accident. How you handled everything alone after. He stopped. Michael squeezed his grandmother's hand. Think about it. Dr. Thompson stood up. Michael, we should get you to school. In the hallway, Michael grabbed Dr. Thompson's sleeve. Did you mean it? About the jobs? Every word. Dr. Thompson checked his watch. But first, you need to graduate, which means getting your grades back up. School felt different with breakfast in his stomach. Michael could focus on his math teacher's words. Could write without his hand shaking. During lunch, Emma sat next to him. You look better, she said quietly. Michael unwrapped the sandwich Dr. Thompson had packed him. Cut it in half automatically. Emma smiled. Just like the cats, huh? He stared at her. You knew? I saw you feeding them sometimes. That's why I kept sharing my lunch. She took the half sandwich he offered. Why didn't you just tell me? Michael looked down at his food. I didn't want anyone to know how bad things were. And now, through the cafeteria window, he could see Dr. Thompson's black car in the parking lot. The same car that had scared him so much before. Now, things might be getting better, but after school, reality hit hard again. Mrs. Peterson stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching cats gather in Michael's yard. Animals belong in shelters, she called as they walked past. Not in decent neighborhoods. Funny, Dr. Thompson said loudly. I remember when you thought the same about certain people. Mrs. Peterson's face went red. She stormed inside, door slamming. What did she mean about shelters? Michael asked as they reached his porch. Nothing good. Dr. Thompson's face was grim. She's been calling animal control. We need to move fast. The gray kitten wound between Michael's feet, purring. Other cats watched from the shadows, waiting for their dinner. What do we do? First, we get them proper food and medical care. Then, Dr. Thompson sighed. We find them homes. Real homes. Michael's chest felt tight. All of them? It's that or the shelter. Dr. Thompson's voice was gentle. You've done an amazing thing, caring for them. But now it's time to help them the right way. The gray kitten jumped into Michael's arms, nuzzling his chin. Tears burned his eyes. Even this one? That's up to you. And your grandmother? Dr. Thompson smiled slightly. Once she's home and everything's settled, one cat might be manageable. Michael held the kitten closer. What if nothing gets settled? What if one problem at a time? Remember? Dr. Thompson started setting out food bowls. Right now, let's just feed them properly. Tomorrow we'll tackle the next thing. As they watched the cats eat, Michael heard Mrs. Peterson's door open and close. Heard her mutter something about those people and bringing down the neighborhood, but for once, he didn't feel afraid. Dr. Thompson stood beside him, solid and calm. The cats were eating good food. His grandmother was getting better. One problem at a time. The gray kitten finished eating and climbed back into his lap, purring. In the growing darkness, its eyes glowed with trust. Whatever came next, Michael wasn't alone anymore. And sometimes that made all the difference. Michael stood in his grandmother's hospital room, heart pounding. 3 days had passed since Dr. Thompson's job offer, and today she was coming home. The oxygen tanks are all set up, Dr. Thompson said, checking his phone. Pharmacy delivered her medications this morning. Michael's grandmother sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed in her own clothes. She looked stronger, but her hands shook as she gripped her cane. I still don't like it, she said. Taking help from strangers? Not strangers anymore. Dr. Thompson smiled. Besides, Michael's already earned his first paycheck. It was true. 2 afternoons at the clinic, feeding cats and cleaning cages, had put $40 in Michael's pocket. Real money he'd earned himself. Ready to go home, Grandma? She nodded, but her eyes were worried. The landlord called again. Said he's coming by today. Let me handle that. Dr. Thompson's voice was firm. You just focus on getting settled. The ride home was quiet. Michael watched his grandmother's face as they turned onto their street. Her eyes went wide. The cats were gone. The porch was clean. Even Mrs. Peterson's yard looked tidier. How? His grandmother started. Community outreach program, Dr. Thompson said simply. Amazing what a little organization can do. Inside, the changes were even more striking. The kitchen gleamed. New oxygen tanks stood ready by his grandmother's chair. And on the counter, full prescriptions, Dr. Thompson pointed. Plus groceries for the week. Michael's grandmother sank into her chair, tears in her eyes. We can't pay for all this. Already covered by your new health insurance. Dr. Thompson checked his watch, which kicks in the moment you sign these employment papers. He pulled an envelope from his coat. Michael held his breath. His grandmother stared at the papers for a long moment. Part-time, 3 days a week, 5 hours a day. Filing, phone calls, basic computer work. Dr. Thompson handed her a pen. All sitting down with breaks as needed. Her hand shook as she reached for the pen. The landlord will be happy to know you have steady income again. Dr. Thompson's voice was gentle. One signature, Mrs. Anderson. That's all it takes. Michael watched his grandmother's face. Saw the moment her pride battled with need. Saw need win. She signed. A soft meow came from the back door. The gray kitten sat there, watching through the glass. Ah, yes, Dr. Thompson said. One more thing to discuss. Michael's heart stopped. He'd known this was coming, but the other cats have been moved to the clinic, Dr. Thompson continued. All getting proper care, ready for adoption. But this one, he looked at Michael. This one seems particularly attached. His grandmother followed their gaze to the kitten. Michael, what aren't you telling me? The whole story poured out then. The first morning with the bread. The growing number of cats. The hunger, the worry, the fear. Oh, baby. His grandmother's voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? You had enough to worry about. Michael couldn't meet her eyes. I just wanted to help, like your mama always did. She wiped her eyes. Remember her feeding those pigeons in the park? Even when we barely had enough ourselves. Michael nodded, throat tight. The kitten can stay, Dr. Thompson said quietly. It's healthy, fixed, vaccinated. Consider it a signing bonus. The gray kitten scratched at the door again. Michael looked at his grandmother. She sighed. One cat. But it's your responsibility. Understand? Michael ran to let the kitten in. It went straight to his grandmother's lap, purring. Well, she said, surprised. Aren't you a friendly little? A knock at the front door made them all freeze. The landlord's voice came through. Mrs. Anderson, we need to talk about the lease. I'll handle this. Dr. Thompson stood up. Michael, why don't you show your grandmother the kitten's food and litter setup? Michael led his grandmother to the kitchen, heart pounding. They could hear voices from the front room. The landlord's angry tone, Dr. Thompson's calm responses. The kitten followed them, weaving between their feet. His grandmother watched it with softening eyes. Needs a name, she said finally. Michael smiled. I was thinking, Hope. Hope. She nodded. Good strong name? The voices in the front room got louder. Michael tried not to listen, but words filtered through. Back rent, payment plan, legal obligations. His grandmother gripped his hand. The kitten, Hope, jumped in her lap again. Finally, the front door closed. Dr. Thompson came into the kitchen, his face unreadable. Well, Michael's grandmother asked. 3 months to catch up on back rent. Regular payments going forward. Dr. Thompson smiled slightly. He agreed to put it in writing. Michael felt dizzy with relief. His grandmother started crying again. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Thank Michael. Dr. Thompson put a hand on Michael's shoulder. His kindness started all this. Even when he had nothing, he gave what he could. Hope purred louder, as if agreeing. Now Dr. Thompson checked his watch again. I believe we all have work to do. Mrs. Anderson, your first shift starts Monday. Michael, I'll pick you up after school for cat duty. And Hope. He scratched the kitten's ears. Keep an eye on these two for me. That night, Michael lay in bed listening to the quiet house. No cats crying outside. No empty stomach growling. Just Hope's purring and his grandmother's breathing machine, steady and strong. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Heard about your new job at the vet's. Cool. Then another from Dr. Thompson. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. Michael smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow was a new day. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what it might bring. Hope needed his pillow, curling up against his chest. Outside, the moon hung full and bright, like a promise kept. One problem at a time, they'd made it through. Together. The morning alarm didn't feel like a curse anymore. Michael woke to Hope's paw batting at his nose and the smell of coffee from the kitchen. 1 week had passed since his grandmother came home. 1 week of real breakfasts, regular meals, and steady paychecks. 1 week of Hope sleeping on his pillow instead of a windowsill. His grandmother's voice drifted down the hall. Yes, Dr. Thompson, I've got those files sorted. No trouble with the computer. Michael smiled. She'd taken to her new job like she'd been doing it for years. Morning, baby. She looked up as he entered the kitchen. Her oxygen tubes were neatly arranged, her work clothes pressed. Eggs are keeping warm in the pan. Hope ran to her food bowl, where fresh kibble waited. No more shared bread crusts or crushed crackers. Dr. Thompson's picking you up for school? His grandmother sipped her coffee. Michael nodded, mouth full of eggs. Then work after. We're starting the adoption events today. Her face softened. You okay with that? Seeing the other cats go to new homes? Yeah. Michael was surprised to find he meant it. They deserve real families. Real homes. Like Hope has. The kitten purred at her name, jumping into Michael's lap. Speaking of home, his grandmother set down her coffee cup. Landlord dropped this off. She slid an envelope across the table. Michael's heart jumped. New lease, she said quietly. 1 year. Dr. Thompson helped work out the payment plan for back rent. Michael stared at the envelope. So we can stay? We can stay? She reached for his hand. Things are going to be different now, baby. Better. A car horn beeped outside. Dr. Thompson's signal. Got your lunch? His grandmother handed him a paper bag. And your math homework? All done. Michael grinned. Emma helped me study. Got a B on yesterday's quiz. Her eyes filled with tears. Your mama would be so proud of you. Michael hugged her carefully, mindful of the oxygen tubes. Love you, Grandma. Love you too, baby. She wiped her eyes. Now go on. Don't keep Dr. Thompson waiting. The black car didn't look scary anymore. Michael slid into the passenger seat, breathing in the familiar leather smell. Big day today. Dr. Thompson pulled away from the curb. Ready to help some cats find homes? Think anyone will want them? Michael worried his lip. They're kind of scraggly. You wanted them. Dr. Thompson smiled. When they were at their scrappiest. At school, everything felt different. Michael's stomach was full. His homework was done. And at lunch, save you a spot. Emma waved from their usual table. Michael sat down, pulling out his lunch bag. Cut his sandwich in half automatically. Old habits? Emma took her half with a smile. Guess so. Michael watched other kids eating, laughing. No more hiding in the library. No more empty stomach cramping. Hey, Emma's voice was soft. You know what you did was really brave, right? Helping those cats when you barely had enough for yourself. Michael's face felt hot. It wasn't brave. It was stupid. I just made everything worse. Until you didn't. Emma bumped his shoulder. Sometimes stupid brave is the best kind. After school, Dr. Thompson drove them to the clinic. The waiting room was full of people and cats. All your strays, Dr. Thompson explained. Cleaned up, healthy, ready for new homes. Michael barely recognized them. The orange tabby's torn ear had healed. The black cat's ribs no longer showed. Even the two striped ones looked sleek and happy. They look so different, Michael whispered. Amazing what some good food and care can do. Dr. Thompson handed him a clipboard. Ready to help match them with families? For the next few hours, Michael told each cat's story. How brave they were. How friendly. How they'd survived on the streets, but never lost their trust in people. One by one, they found homes. The orange tabby went to a young couple. The black cat chose a quiet older man. The striped ones got adopted together by a family with kids. Just like Hope chose you, Dr. Thompson said as they watched the last cat leave with its new family. Michael blinked back tears. I miss them already. That's how you know you did the right thing. Dr. Thompson squeezed his shoulder, letting go so they could have better lives. The ride home was quiet. Michael thought about all the changes in the past week. No more hunger. No more fear. No more cats crying in the dark. His grandmother waited on the porch, Hope in her lap. The oxygen tubes caught the setting sun like silver threads. Good day, she called as Michael walked up. All the cats found homes. His voice cracked a little. She held out her arms. Michael sank into them, breathing in her familiar powder smell. You did good, baby, she whispered. So good. Hope climbed on his shoulder, purring. Inside, the house smelled like dinner cooking. His math book waited on the table, homework already started. Oh, his grandmother said. Mrs. Peterson brought over some cookies. Said she's sorry about everything. Michael stared at the plate of chocolate chip cookies. Really? People can surprise you. She smiled. Sometimes all it takes is seeing someone else do the right thing. That night, lying in bed with Hope curled against his chest, Michael thought about all the surprises. The scary black car that brought help instead of harm. The hungry cats that led him to Dr. Thompson. The neighbor who baked cookies instead of complaints. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Study group tomorrow? Brought my math grade up too. Then one from Dr. Thompson. More adoption events next week. You're good at this. Proud of you. Michael smiled in the darkness. Hope purred louder, like she agreed. Sometimes the scariest things turned out to be blessings in disguise. Sometimes asking for help meant helping others too. And sometimes one small act of kindness could change everything. Michael stood at the front of his class, hands shaking slightly. The poster board behind him showed before and after pictures of the cats he'd helped rescue. So that's why I work at the veterinary clinic now, he finished. To help other animals like Hope. His classmates stared at him. Michael's heart pounded in the silence. Then Emma started clapping. Others joined in. Even the teacher wiped her eyes. Thank you, Michael, she said. That was an excellent presentation on community service. Back at his desk, Michael's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Thompson. How'd the speech go? They liked it, Michael typed back. Really liked it? Another buzz. Ready for the big surprise after school? Michael smiled. The big surprise had been teased all week. Even his grandmother seemed to know about it, judging by her secret smiles. The rest of the school day crawled by. Michael could barely focus on his lessons. When the final bell rang, he ran outside. Dr. Thompson's black car waited in its usual spot. But today, a small crowd gathered near the clinic's van parked next to it. There he is! Emma waved from the group. The cat whisperer himself. Michael slowed down, confused. He recognized some of the families who'd adopted his street cats. The older man with the black cat. The couple with the orange tabby. What's going on? Dr. Thompson stepped forward. Remember how you said other kids might want to help with the adoption events? Michael nodded. Well, Dr. Thompson gestured to the crowd. Meet your new junior volunteer team. Emma bounced on her toes. We're going to help socialize the shelter cats. Get them ready for adoption. Just like you did. Michael stared at the familiar faces. All of you wanna? Your story inspired them. Dr. Thompson smiled. Sometimes it just takes one person showing the way. The older man with the black cat stepped forward. Shadow here changed my life. Was living alone, barely talking to anyone. Now we got a whole community. The young couple nodded. Tiger made us feel like a real family, the woman said, referring to the orange tabby. We want to help other cats find homes too. Michael's vision blurred with tears. Emma squeezed his hand. And that's not all, Dr. Thompson said. Showing the website, Emma pulled out her phone, opened a page titled Hope's Heroes, Youth Volunteer Program. You're famous, she grinned. Well, Hope is. Your story got shared all over social media. Michael scrolled through pictures of his street cats in their new homes. Comments from people wanting to help. Donations for the clinic's outreach program. We've got enough funding now to expand, Dr. Thompson explained. More community events, education programs. And look who's on the advisory board. Emma pointed to a familiar name. Michael's grandmother smiled from the screen. Her job title read, Community Outreach Coordinator. She's amazing with the paperwork, Dr. Thompson said. And people trust her. She knows what it's like to need help and not know how to ask. Michael's phone buzzed again. A text from his grandmother. Proud of you, baby. Come home when you're done. Special dinner tonight. The afternoon passed in a blur. Dr. Thompson showed the new volunteers around the clinic. Michael demonstrated how to approach scared cats, how to earn their trust. Just like you did with Hope, Emma said, successfully coaxing a nervous tabby to take treats from her hand. Speaking of Hope, Dr. Thompson checked his watch. Time to head home. Big night tonight. The ride home felt different. Michael noticed new details. Fresh paint on Mrs. Peterson's fence. Kids playing in yards where cats used to hide. His grandmother waited on the porch, but she wasn't alone. Hope sat in her usual spot, and next to her, surprise! A chorus of voices rang out. The families from the clinic stood in their front yard. Emma and her parents. Even Mrs. Peterson, holding a cake. 1-month anniversary, Dr. Thompson explained. Of Hope's Heroes. Of second chances. Michael couldn't speak. His grandmother hugged him close. Look at all the good you started, she whispered. Just by sharing what little we had. The evening turned into a real party. People brought food. Kids played with Hope, who soaked up the attention. Mrs. Peterson served her chocolate chip cookies. Never thought I'd say this, she told Michael's grandmother. But those cats were a blessing in disguise. Brought the whole neighborhood together. Michael sat on the porch steps, watching it all. Emma plopped down beside him. Penny for your thoughts? Just... Michael gestured at the scene. A month ago, I was so scared. So hungry. And now you're changing lives? She bumped his shoulder. Human and feline. Dr. Thompson joined them, holding paper plates of cake. Ready for phase 2? He asked. Michael looked up. There's more? Always more good to do. Dr. Thompson smiled. The mayor heard about our program. Wants to implement it citywide. Need a spokesperson. Michael's heart jumped. Me? Who better? You lived it. You showed us all how to help. Hope jumped into Michael's lap, purring. From inside came the sound of laughter, his grandmother's voice clear and strong. Okay, Michael said. I'll do it. The sun set slowly over their little celebration. Michael thought about all the changes one small act of kindness had sparked. One hungry kitten, one shared piece of bread, one man in a black car who stopped to help. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. A picture of the orange tabby, Tiger, curled up in his new home. The caption read, "Thank you for giving him a chance. For showing us how to care." Michael held Hope closer, watching his community celebrate around him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help. But tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be. Home. Safe. Full of cake and hope and possibilities. And somewhere in the city, Other hungry cats waited. Other scared kids needed to know they weren't alone. Ready to change more lives? Emma asked softly. Michael smiled. One cat at a time. The city council chambers buzzed with nervous energy. Michael tugged at his new tie, a gift from Dr. Thompson for this moment. Ready? Emma whispered from the seat beside him. Michael nodded, clutching his note cards. His grandmother sat on his other side, oxygen tubes neat and inconspicuous, Hope's Heroes pin gleaming on her collar. The mayor stood at the podium, shuffling papers. Next on the agenda, the proposed citywide expansion of the Hope's Heroes Youth Volunteer Program. We'll hear from its founder, Michael Anderson. Dr. Thompson squeezed Michael's shoulder as he stood. You got this? Walking to the podium, Michael remembered another walk to his back door that first morning, half a slice of bread in his trembling hand. How far they'd come since then. 3 months ago, he began, voice shaking slightly. I was a hungry kid sharing my breakfast with a stray cat. The chamber went quiet. Even the council members leaned forward. I thought I was alone. Thought nobody would understand or help. I was wrong. Michael saw Mrs. Peterson in the audience, nodding. Next to her, the man who'd adopted Shadow held up his phone, recording. One cat became many. One morning of sharing became a mission. And one person who stopped to help, he looked at Dr. Thompson, became the catalyst for change in our whole community. The next half hour passed in a blur. Michael talked about the volunteer program, showed pictures of successful adoptions, explained their plans for expansion. We've already helped 30 cats find homes, he said. Trained 20 youth volunteers. Built bridges between neighbors who never spoke before. His grandmother wiped her eyes. Emma grinned and gave him a thumbs up. But there are more cats out there. More kids who feel alone. More communities that could come together if we just show them how. The council members whispered among themselves. The mayor leaned into his microphone. The funding proposal is significant, he said. How can you assure us this program will work citywide? Michael took a deep breath. Because it already is. He clicked to the next slide. Pictures filled the screen. Other neighborhoods, other kids, other cats. These are from the past week alone. People heard our story and started their own outreach efforts. They just need support, structure, guidance. Dr. Thompson stood up. The Veterinary Association has pledged matching funds. Local businesses, too. This isn't just about cats anymore. It's about community. The mayor nodded slowly. I understand you have one more presentation? Yes, sir. Michael's heart pounded. Could I ask Hope to come forward? His grandmother stood. Hope cradled in her arms the gray kitten, now a sleek cat, wore a special vest with the program logo. Hope was the first, Michael said as his grandmother placed the cat on the podium. She taught me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Hope purred into the microphone. Laughter rippled through the chamber. She's our mascot now, Michael continued. But more than that, she's proof that second chances work. That trust builds bridges. That help goes both ways. The mayor cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. Council members, your votes? One by one, they raised their hands. Unanimous approval. The chamber erupted in applause. Emma hugged Michael. His grandmother cried. Hope jumped back into her arms, purring louder. Dr. Thompson shook the mayor's hand, then turned to Michael. Congratulations, program director. Michael blinked. What? Every citywide initiative needs leadership. Dr. Thompson smiled. Who better than the person who started it all? But I'm just a kid. You're the kid who changed our city. The mayor joined them. One cat at a time. Outside the chambers, reporters waited with cameras. Michael saw familiar faces in the crowd. Families who'd adopted his street cats. New volunteers, neighbors. Michael, Emma called. Look. A group of kids stood at the edge of the crowd, holding a banner. Hope's Heroes, Junior Division. Behind them, pet carriers lined the sidewalk. First official rescue, Emma explained. They found a colony downtown. Need help getting them ready for adoption. Michael looked at Dr. Thompson, who nodded. Go on. This is what it's all about. The next few hours passed in organized chaos. Michael showed the new volunteers how to approach scared cats, how to earn their trust. Just like he'd done that first morning. His grandmother helped coordinate paperwork. Mrs. Peterson brought snacks. Dr. Thompson supervised medical checks. Full circle, Emma said, successfully coaxing a tiny kitten to eat. From sharing your breakfast to running a city-wide program. Michael watched the scene, kids helping cats, adults supporting kids, community coming together. No more hunger. No more fear. No more alone. His phone buzzed. A text from the man who'd adopted Shadow. Changed my life. Thank you. Then another from the couple with Tiger. Our daughter wants to volunteer. Says you inspired her. And finally, one from Dr. Thompson. Proud of you, program director. That evening, they all gathered at Michael's house again. The porch overflowed with people celebrating. Hope held court from her favorite spot on the railing. Speech, someone called. From the founder. Michael stood, heart full. This isn't my program, he said. It belongs to all of us. Every person who stopped to help. Every cat who trusted again. Every kid who found their voice. His grandmother squeezed his hand. Dr. Thompson nodded approval. 3 months ago, I thought sharing my breakfast would make everything worse. Michael looked at Hope. Instead, it showed me that even when we have almost nothing, we can still help others. And sometimes, that's when the real magic happens. Emma raised her glass of soda. To Hope's heroes. To second chances, Michael's grandmother added. To community, Dr. Thompson said. To breakfast, Michael finished softly, remembering that first morning. Hope jumped into his arms, purring. Around them, the celebration continued, a neighborhood transformed, a city changing, all because one hungry kid couldn't ignore one hungry cat. Later that night, Michael sat on his bed. Hope curled in her usual spot on his pillow. His new program director badge sat on the nightstand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cats to save, new lives to change. But tonight, he was just a kid who'd learned the most important lesson. Sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help others first. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. A photo of a small girl sharing her sandwich with a stray cat. The caption read, "You showed us how." Thank you. Michael smiled in the darkness. Hope purred louder, as if to say, see, I told you so. And somewhere in the city, another hungry cat waited. Another scared kid needed hope. Tomorrow, they'd help them all. One breakfast, one cat, one act of kindness at a time.